Hey everyone, welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo. Pardon my maybe lack of energy because I'm recording this in the middle of the night after going to see the late night early premiere screening here in New York for the Super Mario Bros. Movie. This is a movie that I think has been long in the making. Yes, we had the live action film from the 90s. If you actually want to hear my thoughts on the live action film from the 90s, I just covered it on Frame Rec with my co host Matt Chapman, a show that we talk about so bad they're good movies. But if you watch that video, you'll find out that we actually think the Super Mario Bros. Movie from the 90s offers a lot more than some other people have given it a reputation to be. So go check out that video if you want to know my thoughts there, because I think that also will inform my thoughts on this film. Like I said, this is a film that has been long in the making in the sense that Nintendo, they gave away their whole creative freedoms to those directors, those writers, said, do whatever you want with this. And people didn't respond to it that well, to where now, right after that, they kind of bottled everything up and said, okay, now no Mario movies. We're not making anything. We're just sticking to the games. And then finally, they gave the rights to Illumination to make this Mario movie. And for a lot of people, that's a big deal. I mean, this is decades and decades of fans of this property, of these games from different iterations, from the very simple origins to the more complex, more vibrant CG creations that Nintendo would create up to this very day, from GameCubes to Wii's to Switches. Mario has been a part of, I feel like, every family, at least every family that has a video game Nintendo console, a part of their foundation as a gamer, I should say. I'm not even a huge video game person, but Mario is kind of like that one exception where if we're all sitting around, like I'll always go for a game of Mario Kart or Mario Party. It's just one of those things that kind of unites us all these generations of fans. So this is a big deal. This film was a big deal. It was my most anticipated film for April. It's a lot of people's most anticipated films of the year. And I think a lot of people from the trailers had a lot of confidence that this would be probably the next Smash Entertainment animated kids property film, something that would really just crush at the box office and make tons and tons and tons of sequels. And I'll be honest, I think this is going to crush at the box office, and I think this is going to make tons and tons and tons and tons of dollars. That being said, I do have some actual legitimate criticisms for the movie. And I want to say, first and foremost, for anyone who's saying people are being way too tough on this movie because it's a kids movie. Let it go. It's a kids movie. It's a kids movie. I keep hearing that criticism thrown out there, like, oh, it's just a fun kids movie. Let it alone. And there's some truth in that. It is just meant to be a fun movie to entertain, and that's fine. Some movies don't have to necessarily be groundbreaking, thought-provoking, super deep intellectual pieces, but at the same time, to dismiss something as just a kids movie, I think is doing a disservice, not just to the entertainers who make animated films. I mean, Guillermo del Toro in his Oscar speech said, like, animation is not just for kids; it's for all ages. But also, I think it's a disservice to kids in general to say that. The more we just dismiss something as, oh, it's just for the kids, it doesn't mean anything. It's just this, bright, colorful piece of candy we can throw at them. I think that doesn't serve our kids well. We should treat our kids like many adults, treat them with respect. Why do kids not deserve the same quality entertainment as your R-rated horror flick fans? Why do kids have to be put in this own little bubble of, well, their entertainment doesn't have to be quality, it just has to be colorful and fun and entertain them for an hour and a half in front of the TV. And I think that's why Pixar took off so much in the 90s and early 2000s. I think that's why we see big massive hits with stuff like Marcel the Shell or Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. All of these films that came out last year that I think can appeal to all audiences. But even though the kind of pigeonholed target audience, if you had to pinpoint one specific generation, is kids, I still think adults can enjoy it too. And those kids are still getting some rich, valuable lessons from them. We're treating kids like equal audience members. We should treat all audience members equally. So to say that this movie just for the kids, leave it alone, I don't think that's fair. I think we should criticize all art and even be tougher on some art for kids because these are the foundational elements of their growth. I grew up on those Pixar movies, and I like to believe that I am just a more empathetic person because I was exposed to such meaningful and empathetic work growing up from watching the Pixar movies. I would love to go into like a deeper study of the stuff we consume as children and how that affects us growing up and stuff. But I mean, we were at least my generation was spoiled with Pixar movies, and a lot of the generation before, with Disney Renaissance films, these films that were really pushing the boundaries, not just in how colorful and fun they were to watch, but also because of what they had to say, the morals and lessons they taught us. And I still think animation is progressing forward to where when a movie like this comes out, where it is fun, it is a lot of fun, and it has a lot of colorful characters. We know there's a lot of color. The animation is stunning, but that's kind of where it ends with Mario. And I feel like this was such a missed opportunity, especially when you compare it to something like the Lego movie, for example, which is also taking intellectual property. It's taking kids' toys and it's, putting it on screen, giving you all these dazzling set pieces and magical animation, but it's also having something really intelligent and interesting to say. The commentary and the humor goes that extra mile. There's actual creativity and inspiration behind its story. And it sounds like I'm trashing on this film, and I'm not trying to. I'm going to get into the film specifically, but I just wanted to say one last time, to dismiss something as just a kids movie, I don't think that's fair to kids. I don't think that's fair to the people who make these films. I think we should be talking about every movie with a critical lens, because I think kids deserve all the quality that the adults get to in their films. So now getting into this film specifically, this is a very bare bones Mario story. Mario and Luigi are plumbers in Brooklyn. You get a little bit of their origin, and then you see them go through a warp pipe, into this magical land. Mario ends up in the Mushroom Kingdom. Luigi ends up somewhere else, and it's about how they try to get back to one another while also trying to save those new friends they meet along the way. Mario runs into Toad and Princess Peach, and Princess Peach is trying to defend her kingdom against the evil Bowser, and it's all about how Mario has to team up with Peach and Toad to try to summon some other characters and other armies to try to fight against Bowser. It's very bare bones, which I think is fine. It's okay for a story to be kind of minimalist if you can then fill it in with something richer in its thematic work, in its humor. And I laughed a few times in this film. It did get some chuckles out of me. There are some sequences, specifically with Bowser, played by Jack Black, that are really, really funny.
There's one problem. There's a human, has a mustache, just like you.
But overall, I felt a little underwhelmed by the humor. I think they could have pushed it a little further because, like I kind of alluded to earlier, this isn't just for kids. The target audience is kids, but there have been so many generations of Mario fans that I feel like, to kind of dumb down the humor, I think a majority of the audience that's going to come to see these movies are people who grew up with the games that are now in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And I don't necessarily know if they're going to love all the humor that much. There are some great Easter eggs, and I think that's where a lot of the fan service is really going to come from, is seeing things and hearing things. There's a lot of great musical motifs used throughout this thing, and there are probably a dozen, maybe 25, 30, 40, 50. The list goes on and on, different Easter eggs that will have you all doing the Leonardo DiCaprio from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood meme, where you point at the screen and say, I know that reference, I recognize that. And that's a lot of fun. But I think when a film is just kind of there to do that, it left me a little underwhelmed, because I don't think the story was particularly interesting enough to stand on its own. I think it's really on how you kind of fill in and color in that story. And speaking of color, like I said, this is a vibrant, beautiful piece of animation. I think if I were to just watch this, even without any sort of story attached, I mean, the visuals are dazzling. I would love to just spend hours and upon hours in this world, in this beautiful, colorful world. And I think we are going to spend a lot of time in this world. I think there are going to be sequels, because I think this is going to be a big audience hit. It hasn't been a huge critical hit, but I think it's going to be an audience hit. And I do think they're going to make many more of these movies. So my hope going forward is that these movies just try to take the story in more interesting directions, kind of play around with some of the themes that are kind of subtly there, but not really committing full force to. This is really just about the characters interacting with one another, and us as the audience getting to see these characters on screen, on the big screen, for the first time in animated form. And that's fine. That's fun, but I just wish there had been more, especially given how much time they have spent to put this on screen. I just wish there was a little more, especially when movies like the Lego movie, like I said, are doing the humor much better and the commentary much better. And movies, like I mentioned past year, Puss in Boots, Marcel the Shell, Pinocchio, are kind of pushing the boundaries in their storytelling, in their mature themes, in this kind of animated, family friendly lens. Like I said, Jack Black's Bowser is a highlight. There are some other cast highlights. Anya Taylor-Joy is really, really solid as Peach. This Peach is probably my favorite version of Peach I've ever seen because she's not the damsel in distress this time. She is kind of her own strong character, which I really love to see.
Together, we are going to stop that monster.
I don't agree with a lot of the criticisms that some like diehard fans have that she should have just been a damsel. That was actually one of the areas that I think they actually tried to progress this property forward and try to give us something new and fresh. And I actually applaud them on that front. As for Mario and Luigi, I mean, a lot of criticisms were coming in for Chris Pratt prior to this film because Chris Pratt said, "Hey, don't criticize my Mario voice until you see the film." And when you see the film, the very second scene, that choice is addressed. The choice to make his accent more Brooklyn than Italian offensive stereotype. It's a me. There is a reason behind it, and they go into that. And it's another one of those things where you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. And the fact that that was the main criticism going in, and then it's immediately debunked in the second scene, actually kind of made me chuckle because it's like, you know, fans spent so much of their energy just being so negative about Chris Pratt's casting. I don't know if he's the best choice, but he's fine. I mean, he does a really good job. Charlie Day is really good as Luigi too. Luigi, I feel, of any of the characters, really gets sidelined the most because they want to kind of split Mario and Luigi up to eventually have them try to find one another again. But when you split them up and most of the film is then devoted to Mario and not Luigi, you kind of forget Luigi's even in the film until it comes back to Luigi and you're like, oh yeah, wait, Luigi's here. And I wish they had given him a substantial story plot. If anything, he's kind of the damsel in distress because he's the one who's kind of waiting for Mario to come save him, essentially. I mean, he becomes that damsel figure. I wish they had done a little bit more with Luigi, but all the fun supporting characters. I mean, Donkey Kong is great. I think Seth Rogen, it's such an instantly recognizable voice that the whole time I'm thinking, oh, it's Seth Rogen playing Donkey Kong and not like I'm actually watching Donkey Kong, which is not a huge criticism. I love Seth Rogen's voice, but when Donkey Kong goes, you know, like you listen to it and you're like, oh, that's Seth Rogen's laugh, which is, you know, silly and funny, whatever.
Oh my God. Okay.
I really like Toad. I like Keegan-Michael Key in this film. Again, the characters and the voices of these characters are the best thing about this film, is seeing these characters kind of interact with one another in a non-game sense.
Adorable.
Where I think this film really falters is in just how creative it is and the story they chose to design around these characters. I just think with the rich and expansive backstory and property you have to pull from, it felt like they kind of did the bare minimum. It just feels like they're trying to think of, well, how are we going to get to show Mushroom Kingdom? Oh, we also need to have a Mario Kart sequence. So the best way to do that is maybe have Donkey Kong be the one who introduces Mario Kart. Like, it feels like they're just trying to cram references in without having a really inspired way of transitioning from reference to reference. I did just bring up Mario Kart. The Mario Kart sequence is really fun. Wahoo! And it's fun to be on the Rainbow Road. It's fun to see people fall off the Rainbow Road. So like I said, it's a lot of fun in terms of seeking out Easter eggs and pointing at the screen saying, I know that, I recognize that. But I wish film was a little bit more than that. Even films like Avengers Endgame, there's a lot of that where you're pointing at the screen like, I know that character, but I think overall what it has to say and the story it's telling is really solid, is really thought-provoking, is really deep. And I didn't get that here. And it's a shame because I was so excited. And like I said, I hope in future installments they go further in exploring this universe, but also kind of finding more interesting stories to tell. So that's my review for the Super Mario Brothers movie. I didn't go really in depth with the story because there really isn't a lot to go in depth on. The action's fine, the colors are great, the acting's great, but it's a lot less exciting than I hoped it would be. But that's not to say you're not going to enjoy it. There were kids in my screening that really enjoyed it. There were adults in my screening that really enjoyed it. There were several moments where the audience erupted into applause. And I'm not just talking about the Nicole Kidman ad, which always gets applause. I'm talking about the movie itself. There were several moments that got applause. Princess Peach in particular. We had a very big Peach stan crowd because every kind of seen that Peach did something badass in, which is pretty much all of them. But every time Peach did something badass, the crowd erupted into applause. So it's clear that audiences are digging it a lot more than critics. And I come from an interesting POV because I'm not an official critic, but I look at things in a more critical eye. But I am still a fan. So it's tough because there are times where I want to cheer and I'm like, oh my God, that's so fun. That's so cool. But at the same time, I do want to still give this film its criticism, because I also think if you're going to make a ton of films, I really want them to kind of take this criticism to heart and expand on it. I'm going to bring up the original 1993 Mario Brothers really quickly. My whole video is there on FrameRec, but I do think that movie, while not a faithful adaptation by any means, still had something really interesting to say using these characters and this property, to where I'm honestly more inclined probably to recommend that if you're looking for something deeper and new and fresher with this IP. This movie that we're talking about, the Super Mario Brothers movie 2023, is going to be your much more faithful adaptation. So if you want to see something that feels familiar, this is the way to go. But if you want to see something that kind of pushes the boundaries and has something more interesting to say in general, I actually think the original, while it was panned, while people hate it, I think has a lot more interesting stuff to actually say with its material. It has a lot to say with political corruption, cop corruption, brotherly bond. I mean, there's a lot that's in that original movie that I almost wish they had translated to this movie. It's really interesting to compare the two. They are so hard to compare. Like, they are so different, so polar opposite. But it's so interesting watching both back to back and seeing which strengths each one possesses. And I think both do have their strengths. I think the Super Mario Brothers movie, this new one, does have its strengths, but ultimately, I think its weaknesses are so glaring that it makes me overall a little disappointed, even if I would still recommend it, because I still think you'll have a good time. So that's my review for the Super Mario Brothers movie. If you've seen it, if you're planning on seeing it, if you're not going to see it, still leave a comment, because it's fun to talk to y'all down below. But like this video, subscribe to this channel. I've got a lot more reviews coming out. April is a jam-packed month, and we're even going to get more and more and more movies as the summer movie season rolls on. So please subscribe to this channel so you can see all of it, plus all my other awesome shows that I'm doing with so many great co-hosts. So there's a lot of great stuff going on in the channel. Please stick around to it. Stay tuned, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.